Yo, what up? We're back. And the theme of this week being annoying as hell, I wanted to kind of talk about some routes. Because I think that a lot of people are playing too intricate of routes. And people are playing actual routes whenever they should actually just be holding W in the dungeon. This is crazy, right? Because it's going to be a video talking about routes. But in general, I have designed some routes that will help people just kind of get through each and every single dungeon, holding W as easy as possible. And we're going to talk about some of maybe the problem points of each and every single dungeon, and talk about maybe what the pulls that are going to be a little bit difficult or spicy with the routes that I made. First and foremost, we got Ara Kara. Ara Kara, not too much to necessarily say about Ara Kara. I think that the last boss is almost 100% of the difficulty. Here, basically fighting this sucker is pretty much every difficult part of the entire encounter in the entire dungeon itself. And so basically, if you can get through this guy, you can get through the fight. A lot of people are really bad at managing their waves. I would recommend looking up just a video as to how you pre-position, manage your waves, that kind of thing. Additionally, some people like to really inconsistently dispel players, which can cause a lot of problems in this fight. In terms of this route, I think that like pulling the beginning area, you can pull it like a lot more aggressive. Like we pulled it really aggressive on the beta, and it was actually pretty chill. But like I don't think that you necessarily have to do that to be able to time this key. I think that you can just like take it as slow as possible, because something that's like pretty consistent this season is that occurring 15 seconds of death penalty isn't necessarily acceptable, and that's what ends up wiping and depleting your key more than anything else. So yeah, so basically the beginning area not too bad. You know, even this middle area is not terrible. Maybe you can break it. You can break up this pull 8 into 2 separate pulls if you prefer. That's pretty reasonable. I think the last thing is like the only real difficult part here is going to be just this end area. Oh my gosh, is this end area over here? Some of this trash that's over here can be a little bit difficult. I found it a bit easier to actually go down the middle, but it's hard to get count if you do that. And so yeah, basically this is basically the route here. So yeah, let's talk about City Threads. I think City Threads, the difficult part is the very beginning of the dungeon. There's a couple particular mobs like the Swarm Guard and the Herald. The Herald is really difficult because, you know, getting kicks on them consistently is nearly impossible for pugs. In conjunction with that, the Swarm Guard has like a dot that it's placed on all the players that I see is particularly brutal. So if you can slow pull this first area, I would recommend even like lusting pull 2 as opposed to lusting pull 1. I think that lusting this pull right here is way more difficult than the remainder of this dungeon. Beyond that, it's like, dude, just pull slow at the very beginning and be able to get through it. You're gonna have your plate full with whenever you're doing, you know, boss, you know, the last boss of the dungeon, stuff like that. There's no need to like run the risk of actually over pulling the very beginning. So just play that super slow and you'll be more or less fine. The only other difficult pull is maybe this pull 10 right here that's in front of the mini boss after second boss. In theory, you could just break this up into 2 separate pulls and you're more or less fine if you're really worried. The issue with this is that it's got 2 Webmancer casters in the pull. So it could be maybe a little bit tricky for a pug, but in general, you know, again, we're looking to hold W in every single dungeon. We're looking to minimize deaths. The way that we minimize deaths and the part that we're really scared about is the very beginning. Okay, let's talk about Dawnbreaker a little bit. Dawnbreaker pretty easy. There's only so much that you can realistically pull. At the very beginning, you know, you're going to be doing standard stuff. There's, again, static mobs that are required. I think that you actually get a decent amount of your count from the church area with the AoE Fear mini-boss area. Just inside that church, I think that's where a large portion of your count should be coming from. Beyond that, you know, there's this one trash pack that you have to pull that's around the second boss area. That's not too bad. The last mini-boss of the dungeon gives you 6.5% enemy forces. Again, there's only realistically so much that we can pull in here, so I think that this is by far the easiest dungeon to hold W in. Grim Batol is a bit weird. I think that Grim Batol, you can realistically just like hard hold W through this dungeon and be able to get count. I do think that maybe this is the dungeon that benefits the most from having a pre-planned route in some areas. The thing that I want you to know about Grim Batol the most is like summoning one of these Twilight Destroyers is actually not too bad. These things are a lot of count, and if you can play them with any additional mobs, it's okay. Sometimes in pugs, it's like pretty difficult to play them with additional mobs, so you can avoid doing that if you really want to. But I found that mobs like the Molten Giants and adding a bunch of Warlocks are just like so count inefficient is the problem. And so like this one dragon is worth the entire pack of Warlocks here, and you can only do this pack solo. So of course you would rather do this dragon, especially if you can even like kind of chain it, or maybe even like partially chain it into a different pack. And so in that regard, there's some mobs in here, particularly spawning a dragon at various points, that could be pretty good. Then there's this other 2 warlock pack. There's this corner warlock pack with the beguiler as well. I also don't like this. I don't love this molten giant pull. But again, we're looking to hold W. We're looking to make this as consistent as possible on all the players in our group, and we're trying to make this just simplify it down as far as possible. Mr. Tirna Scithe, I don't think that anybody's like really surprised anything that's going on in Mr. Tirna Scithe. I'm gonna kind of skip the middle part because I just kind of click some mobs that you can potentially get, but you have to be a little bit flexible with your count in Mr. Tirna Scithe. First and foremost, there's the Spike Claws and the Tyrnian Villagers. This is the standard first pull of the dungeon. I would recommend saving Lust because you really want it on this first boss. Then you skip this trash pack that's got the Bowbreaker in it because it's not that good. If you have to pull it, you have to pull it. Again, being flexible is the most important thing with your group, and don't let them wipe to just like stupid shit. Don't incur a full 5 deaths worth of death penalty over dumb shit. The middle or the end area is pretty straightforward. You never pull more than 1 stack horn at a time. If you're ever pulling more than 1 stack horn at a time, you're basically doing it wrong. Even like pull 14, this isn't exactly how you're supposed to do it. You're definitely supposed to be like separating this out into 2 separate pulls to be able to get 100%. So yeah, just be looking to only pull 1 stack horn at a time. Basically, once you end up pulling into the stack horn, that's all the mobs that you realistically should be grabbing. Just try to fill in the count gaps because the maze is not static in terms of how much count you're getting from each route in the maze, and so in that regard, you can actually get a few different options in here, but it's about the same count through most of the routes. Necrotic Wake, they actually upped this count a lot recently. I find this dungeon to be pretty effing annoying to be able to get count in. I found that getting count in the first area is probably the best way of doing it, though. You see this pull 1. I would not go this large in a normal group. I think that I just clicked these mobs because these are the mobs that you want to be grabbing. But yeah, basically these are all the mobs that you want in the first area. I actually don't like this landing pack. Instead, I'd rather do this pull 4, especially with the Gatekeeper, because you're able to get this Fleshcrafter. This Fleshcrafter is the mob that is the Throw Cleaver ability. And whenever you use that Throw Cleaver ability and you hit a Gatekeeper, it does infinite damage to that mob. So yeah, this pack is not the worst possible thing. The pull that I hate the most is by far pull 13, though. Narzuda is just a really annoying mob. It does way too much damage. I normally end up blowing like double Anima Orb on it a lot of the time because it has a tendency to be able to kill your tank, especially with the Necrotic Bolt. And so, you have to just be really aware of the trash that's in this dungeon. Narzuda is probably the hardest trash pack. There's a couple of other, there's a couple of other trash packs that are not too bad, but Narzuda is by far the hardest one. You probably want to know this about this Necromancer. Most of the other Necrotic mages, or the Brittlebone mages, don't actually have Frostbolt Volley, but for some reason these Brittlebone mages attached to this Necromancer do, for whatever reason. By far the hardest part of this dungeon, though, is Surgeon Stitchflesh. Being able to get him killed off, being able to Zerk him, having enough damage, making sure that you're saving 100% of all of your resources for the entire dungeon into this one specific boss is dumb, and I think it's a really dumb strat. And there's like very little recourse if you're pugging and somebody's trolling your group, and that's what makes this dungeon realistically super hard. It's not necessarily the routing, although I find it really easy to miscount in here because I feel like every time I'm in this dungeon, you kind of miscount. Boralus is weird. I actually would love to skip all the trash at the beginning of Boralus if I'm in a coordinated group, but obviously in a pug, it's not what you're going to be doing. Holding W in here is more or less fine. I've even had some mobs that I find pull all the time that you wouldn't necessarily want to pull, like this Enforcer and this Irontide Raider. But yeah, the first area of trash, as long as you just like really lock in on the first area of trash, you can lust like pull 2, that kind of stuff.
See you on Tuesday, boys. Tuesday.
Goodbye, Kalamazoo. See you on Tuesday as well. See you on Reset. But yeah, basically just trying to get through this first area of trash is important. There's some trash at the back end of this dungeon next to Hadal Dark Fathom that can be particularly annoying. I actually think that this Irontide Raider sniper pull is completely off limits, and I would avoid pulling it at all costs. That's why I kind of devised a route that pulls a decent amount of the Monkey Town area. It pulls it still pulls most of the mobs in the Hadal area. It's just like these mobs are off into the corner and they're kind of like locked away over here, so you actually don't have to pull them. Last thing, Stonevault. I think Stonevault is not too bad, all things considered. Or rather, it's not too bad in the sense of it's very straightforward as to what you should and shouldn't be pulling. I actually devised a route that also allows you to be able to get this dwarf buff where you get 10% versatility. That's over here. you're going to overcount a little bit, but I think that the gain of the buff itself is more advantageous than anything else. And so yeah, I also like to sprint straight at Master Machinists to be able to get that dwarf buff. I think that people have a tendency to overpull in the hallway and pull like 3 packs whenever they realistically shouldn't. I think that you should only be looking to pull maybe like 2 packs at the most in some of these hallways, except for pull 1. Pull 1, you can less this, and triple pull, and you're more or less fine. I found it a bit difficult to also do pull 15 as a separated pull, but realistically, you could actually just do the Speaker Howler pack and then do pull 15 separate if you really wanted to, as in 2 separate packs. But yeah, those are all 8 dungeons and kind of some of the whole W routes that I think that players should be looking to do, especially early on in the season. Accruing deaths is just way too punishing right now. And that's a lot of the reason that people have been wiping in dungeons. That's a lot of the reason that people are depleting keys, is because it's just nearly impossible to be coming back from a full wipe. And so making sure that you're playing it as slow as possible, making sure that you're no longer wiping, and making sure that you're playing safe and conservative routes are going to be the best ways that you can time keys. I hope it helps. I'm going to link the routes down in the comments or in the description below. And I hope to see you in next week's video, or tomorrow's video. Why did I just say next week's video? Tomorrow's video. Goodbye. Also, sorry about the background noise. Goodbye.